Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin, and
we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our 2024 Fighter Class Guide for Dungeons & Dragons 5e.
We'll be taking an in-depth look at all the class features, weapon choices, ability scores, and build options to help you build a fighter for your next D&D campaign. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
Now, fighters are only as impressive as the monsters that they slay in battle, which is why our Fighter Class Guide is sponsored by Roll for Combat.
The team behind several of the Battle Zoo Bestiary books is now bringing us Battle Zoo Bestiary Elemental Storm, which is currently available on Kickstarter.
It's got over 170 award-winning new monsters, new elemental spells, new Monster Hunter rules, and monster crafting rules compatible with both 5th edition and Pathfinder 2nd edition.
Channel the power of over 20 unique elements, including the classics like air, earth, fire, and water, but also new elements like music, space, and time.
Your victorious fighters can craft weapons, armor, magic items, and more from monsters and then infuse elemental magic into them, including elemental infusions and elemental spells.
Everything in the book is compatible with the 2024 core rules, or you can get them for Pathfinder 2nd edition. The Kickstarter features not only the book, but includes hundreds of digital assets and tokens that can be easily used in any VTT. This project is going to be jam-packed with lots of elemental goodies to bring to your game table. So make sure to click the links below to get in on the Kickstarter while it's live, or after the Kickstarter, you can click the links below to grab your copy of the Battle Zoo Bestiary Elemental Storm. And now let's start talking about the fighter.
Few classes in Dungeons & Dragons are as iconic and well-loved as the humble fighter. Master of weapons and armor, the fighter really is one of the classes that is whatever you want to make it be, because you can choose so much style about how you play, build, and roleplay your fighter.
The fighter is one of the most versatile classes in the game, and so in today's video, we're not only going to be looking at all the core features of the fighter, we're also going to be discussing how that plays into some specific build ideas. There are many builds possible with the fighter. We're going to look at some of the iconic options, such as the archer, the dual wielder, the shield bearer, and the two-handed weapon fighter.
Now, there are so many more possibilities with fighters, which is one of my favorite elements of the class. You can do everything from an unarmed brawler to a mounted warrior, or do really wild builds, especially when you get multi-classing involved. But these archetypes, the archer, the dual wielder, the shield bearer, and the two-hander, are kind of iconic in, I think, the history of Dungeons & Dragons, and kind of some of the first places that we think of when we want to play a fighter, because obviously, mastering weapons and wading into battle to take down your enemies is really core, I think, to the fighter archetype. And whether or not you have some extra skills and tricks in there, or like to protect your allies, these are all good places to go if you're playing a fighter for the very first time.
So when you start building your fighter, there are some core traits that you're going to want to look at and keep in mind when you get started. The fighter's primary ability score is going to be likely strength or dexterity. Depending on the type of build you're doing, you're going to want to choose one of these as your main attribute. Generally speaking, fighters that are going to be wielding big weapons and running into battle and you want them to have heavy armor on the front lines are going to want to focus on strength, while as archers or more nimble fighters are going to want to focus on dexterity.
Regardless of how you decide to build your fighter, you're going to get a D10 hit die, which is going to give you 6 hit points per level and 10 hit points when you first start off, and you get proficiency in strength and constitution saving throws. So even if you do choose to be a more nimble fighter, you're still going to be pretty tough.
You also get to choose 2 skill proficiencies from the list provided to fighters. This includes acrobatics, animal handling, athletics, history, insight, intimidation, persuasion, perception, or survival. With this, there's not really any bad choices here, depending on the build you're going for. Most fighters, I find, steer towards athletics or acrobatics as an option. Perception is always a good choice, but really, your pick.
I do personally think that having acrobatics and athletics really gives you a lot more mobility and utility, especially in exploration, and perception is kind of indispensable. Regardless of how you go with your skill proficiencies, all fighters get everything when it comes to weapons and armor. You get all simple weapons, you get all martial weapons, you get light, medium, and heavy armor and shields. So you can use them all if you want to. So even in a situation where you are playing a character that might not normally use a shield, you still might want to bring one along with you. This also means that your fighter can bring along a bunch of backup weapons if they need them for situational emergencies, just in case, like bringing up a backup ranged weapon or a backup melee weapon.
I think it's a great call out that even if you're playing the archer fighter, having a shield on your back and a short sword on your side, that if you are in a situation like a closed off dungeon where you have to fight in melee close quarters, you might want to bust out the shield and sword and start using it. Fighters are very versatile in their weapon proficiencies as well as their ability to use multiple weapons, and we're going to see that even more as we move forward with them.
In fact, this leads us right into the first of the fighter's class features, which is Weapon Mastery. Fighters get to unlock the Mastery property for 3 weapons of their choice, and they can replace their weapon masteries whenever they take a long rest, and they gain additional ones as they gain levels.
Weapon masteries allow you to add an attribute to every attack you make with that weapon. The Maul, for example, has the Topple property, which allows you to knock your enemies prone. A lot of these weapon masteries are defined by the type of weapon you choose to use, but at 9th level, the fighters actually get Tactical Master, which allows them to add the Push, Sap, or Slow property instead of the mastery that the weapon normally has, giving them some flexibility in how they want to use their weapons.
Tactical Master is great because you get to choose this each time you attack with the weapon, and so it means that if you want to push your enemies, or slow them, or give them disadvantage on their attack rolls, starting at 9th level, you've got that on tap and on demand. This really rewards you as well for taking a variety of different weapons with your fighter, although certain weapons will support certain playstyles. For example, the Vex and Nick weapon properties work really well for a dual wielder, and some ranged combatants might find that they're pretty limited on exactly which weapon properties ranged weapons have available. But what's cool is Tactical Master lets you add Push, Sap, or Slow to any ranged weapon as well, despite the limited number of properties that ranged weapons typically have.
Also at 1st level, we're going to gain our fighting style. This is an important feature of the fighter. It's really going to define what type of build you're making. This is going to give you an extra feat at 1st level. It is going to be one of your fighting style feats. We're going to talk more about that when we discuss feats overall for the fighter.
Also at 1st level, so we're pretty front loaded here, we're going to get Second Wind. Second Wind allows your fighter to use a bonus action to regain hit points equal to 1d10 plus your fighter level. Because it's a bonus action, this isn't going to slow you down on your turn. You're going to be able to move, still attack, and then you can Second Wind to heal yourself. You can do this twice per long rest, but every time you take a short rest, you gain 1 use of it back, and you get more uses overall as you gain levels.
As you level up with the fighter, Second Wind actually improves. At 2nd level, you gain Tactical Mind. This is going to allow you to use your Second Wind to add 1d10 to a failed skill check. This is going to be really useful for pushing fighters into new territory in terms of skill challenges or social encounters or exploration.
Best of all, with Tactical Mind, if you still fail the check after adding the 1d10, your Second Wind isn't expended.
It gets even better at 5th level with Tactical Shift. When you use Second Wind now, you get to move up to half your speed. So this is going to really help with the maneuverability of fighters.
Yeah, and you get that in addition to the heal. So if you need to make a little bit of a retreat because you got pretty beat up, it's pretty useful for getting away, as well as closing the distance sometimes. One of the most iconic features for the fighter, however, is your 2nd level feature, Action Surge. This just flat out allows you to take an extra action on your turn, and you must finish a short rest though before you can do so again.
This extra action can be used for many, many things. It's great to use if you had to spend your turn opening up a door, pulling it open, or flipping a lever, or doing some other major interaction, but you're also surrounded by enemies. It's also great if there's just a big enemy in front of you and you want to attack them more times. So you cannot cast a spell or use a magic item when you use your Action Surge, although you could use your normal action to do that and then Action Surge to attack more.
Now, it's important to note that Action Surge doesn't give you any additional movement or bonus actions. It's just one extra action, which again can be anything except the magic action. This does enable some really amazing combinations for the fighter though, and it really makes you feel like an action hero every time you do it, especially at high levels when you get an extra use of it.
Action Surge is greatly improved by the fact that at 5th level, fighters get extra attack. This means that when you take the attack action on your turn, you can now attack twice instead of once. This means that when you use Action Surge to gain an extra action, using the attack action now is going to get you 2 extra attacks instead of 1. Extra attack is a great feature that really allows the fighter to stand up in combat and deliver more attacks readily.
Yeah, an action surging fighter who just goes all out and attacks with both their actions is making 4 or more attacks per turn once they have extra attack. And so you can pretty much one round a lot of enemies by doing this. It's important to note that extra attack isn't going to give you extra attacks if you're making an attack using your reaction or a bonus action. For example, if you were dual wielding or taking an opportunity attack. What is cool though, is that instead of attacking with your weapon for each attack, if you wanted to, you could make an unarmed strike to grapple or shove a target. Remember, an extra attack is not an extra action though, so while you can grapple and shove with the unarmed strikes of the extra attacks, you couldn't do something like try to, use that to interact with the environment an extra time.
Something that is specific to the fighters is that at 11th level, they gain 2 additional attacks when they take the attack action, and at 20th level, this is going to be 3 additional attacks when they take the attack action. So in total, that means 11th level, you're making 3 attacks, 20th level, you're making 4 attacks, and if you action surge at 20th level, you can make 8 attacks. Pretty good, and that's a very fighter thing to do.
Yeah. Another cool augmentation to your attacks is that starting at level 13, you get studied attacks, which grants you advantage on your next attack if you happen to miss that enemy. So it makes your fighter very, very reliable at landing all of these attacks. Now, if you are a dual wielder, you could be making even more attacks, which is even more fun. We'll talk about that shortly. Fighters gain ability score improvements at level 4, level 6, level 8, level 12, level 14, and level 16. What's really cool about this is actually 2 more than other classes. Most other classes, they don't get an ability score improvement or a feat at level 6 and level 14. So you get more and you get them sooner.
At 19th level, you're going to gain an epic boon feat, which are special feats for sort of the end game of any campaign that you're playing in. Something to keep in mind is that ability score improvements allow you to up any of your ability scores by +2, or you can choose 2 and add +1 to them. This is very helpful for allowing fighters to max out their primary stats, whether you're using strength, dexterity, or if you want more hit points through upping your constitution. Depending on the way you're building your fighter, you may want to get these stats as high as possible. However, whenever you get an ability score improvement, you can also choose to take a feat. All of the general feats in the game offer a +1 to one of your ability scores. So instead of getting +2 or 2 +1s, you get a +1 and something extra that you're going to get to do, whether that's adding the ability to cast a spell or do something extra on your turn in combat.
Note, of course, that with ability score improvements and general feats, you are capped to increasing one of your stats as high as 20 only. You can't go past 20.
At 9th level, we're going to gain the Indomitable feature. This allows you to re-roll a failed save, and you get to add your fighter level to the re-roll. You can use this once per long rest, but you gain additional uses, having 2 at 13th level and 3 at 17th level.
Indomitable is amazing for those really scary saving throws that your fighter might not be very good at, but have really, really bad consequences for failing. Fighters are often not very good at their intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. They tend to have a great physical presence, but things like a Mind Flayer's Mind Blast, or getting dominated or mind controlled, or getting banished to another plane of existence tend to be the bane of the fighter's existence. And so I really do recommend saving these Indomitable uses for the really scary things. If someone's throwing a fireball at you, you might be able to suck up that damage just fine, even if you fail the saving throw. But it's another thing entirely if you're going to get stunned. So use the reroll for when it really matters. Most campaigns will be using point buy to allocate your ability scores, so you'll be able to customize your ability scores exactly how you want to. If you're rolling your stats, you'll just want to use the general principles that we discuss here with point buy, but make sure that you talk to your dungeon master before you roll your stats. Of course, your background choice will also give you the choice of adding +1 to 3 ability scores or +2 to 1 and another +1 to any other. We generally recommend going for the +2 and the +1 rather than the 3 +1s for fighters.
Now, we're going to look at a few different builds and how you might adjudicate your ability scores. The builds that we talked about earlier, the shield bearer, the two-hander, the archer, and the dual wielder, are divided into kind of 2 categories here. And again, that's sort of the tanky frontline fighter or the nimble fighter. For the shield bearer and the two-hander, this is your more tanky fighter, so you are going to want to focus on strength and con as your primary attributes. So we're going to be using point buy, and we're putting a 15 in both of those. When it comes to your mental ability stats, we think that putting a 13 in wisdom makes sense because wisdom is going to be used for things like perception and survival, which are useful on a fighter. Your dexterity doesn't really matter that much. It's nice to have dexterity so that you can survive things like a fireball and, maybe make those saving throws, but you're going to be wearing heavy armor, so you can probably eat that damage anyway. When it comes to your int and charisma, you're probably dumping one of them. We usually dump intelligence. From your backgrounds, you're going to gain a +2 and a +1. We looked at the farmer or soldier as our optimal picks to allow us to take a +2 in strength and a +1 in constitution.
Now, if you're playing an archer or dual wielder, your strength score is not going to be nearly as important. So we decided to leave this one at 10. Instead, we're going to be using our dexterity, which is going to contribute to our armor class, our attack rolls, our damage, and our initiative. We're going to crank this as high as we possibly can. So we're going to put a 15 here, and we're going to put our +2 from our background into this. It's still worthwhile for our archer or dual wielder to have a really good con score. You don't need to go quite as high as we've recommended here, but I'm still putting in a 15 and boosting it up by another +1. Again, fighters tend to take a lot of hits on the head, so intelligence is not terribly important. If we ever have to make a scary intelligence saving throw, we're going to use Indomitable for that. But wisdom is decent enough. We'll put that at a 13. And again, charisma, well, we might want to have something for our social interactions checks on here. If we have got the points left over, I just put a 10 in here. If you're looking for the standard backgrounds that are going to give you the +2 to dexterity and the +1 to con, you can go with the charlatan, the criminal, the guide, or the soldier. This is going to give you a pretty good array of different origin feats to choose from as well. The soldier is going to give you savage attacker. The criminal is really good because it gives you alert, which is going to boost your initiative even further. The charlatan will give you more options with the skilled origin feat. The guide's a little bit interesting because it gives you magic initiate druid. But if you wanted to go for something outside of these recommendations and get the lucky feat as well, there's a couple different options there, but you're not going to be able to boost both your dex and con. You'll probably have to boost your dex and maybe your wisdom instead. Choosing your species for your fighter is largely a really big role-playing decision. And really comes down to the type of character and the origin that you have in mind for your character. So you can feel pretty confident that no matter what species you choose, you're going to have something useful for your fighter, and there's really no optimal or best choice here.
Every species does give you a small packet of options and maybe an ability or two that you can use with that sort of species. Some of my favorites personally for fighters are looking at things like the Dragonborn, the Dwarf, the Goliath, and the Orc. Of course, I also like a human fighter. It's a little classic, but humans are always a good choice.
I completely agree with you, Kelly. I think the Dragonborn's breath weapon is a lot of fun, and the fact that starting at level 5 you can fly using draconic energy is great. Nothing is more iconic than a dwarf fighter in my estimation. Dwarven toughness, especially if you choose an origin with the tough feat, is going to give you so many more hit points.
You can handle anything in combat. Yeah. Eat a fireball. You don't care.
I think the Goliath, the different ancestries are a lot of fun, especially the ones that let you add extra fire damage to your hits or knock people prone, and you can be large and in charge. And once again, the Orc with their adrenaline rush and relentless endurance is both strong and super fast. Although I do think that if you are going to go for more of the nimble fighters, especially the archers or the dual wielders, you really can't do too bad with the elf and the halfling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this really just draws the point again that the species is about fitting your build and fitting your theme and your role-playing options.
Now we come to weapon selection. This choice for your fighter is going to be the concern of both how we're going to build and play our fighter, but also what weapon masteries that we're going to have access to that are going to augment that play style. If you're going for a two-hander, you really can't go wrong with the greatsword, although the Gray's weapon mastery adds reliability in that if you miss, you still do some damage. It's not terribly exciting. You might instead want to go for a pike to push your enemies around, or a maul or a lance to knock them prone. I think a great backup here for the two-hander is carrying a trident, which is a thrown weapon that knocks your target prone.
I would love to see a pirate fighter who has the trident who they're throwing. When we look at the archer is obviously going to take a different approach, and they're going to look at the longbow as probably the iconic choice here, which has the slow property. Although I really also like the fighter with the heavy crossbow, which has the push ability. Varg from Dragon Age is an iconic dwarf fighter with a heavy crossbow, and I just love the idea of shooting guys and knocking them off of walls. You can also use any weapons from dual wielder as a backup for your archer in case they get into melee combat. Much like Legolas, he busts out the double daggers when it's time to fight in melee.
Now for the shield bearer, especially if you're being the classic dwarven defender like Gimli, going for the battle axe or the warhammer is going to give you topple and push, knocking your targets prone or knocking them back. But the classic human fighter with the longsword and shield is also pretty good because the sap property on the longsword gives your enemies disadvantage on their attack rolls. Again, this is another place where I might want to pack a javelin or a trident as a backup ranged weapon.
And for the dual wielder, this is where you're going to bring in things like the short sword, which has the Vex property, and the scimitar, which has the Nick property. When you hit with a Vex weapon, like the short sword, you gain advantage on your next attack. So you start with the short sword, then with advantage, hit with your scimitar, which has the Nick property, which allows the bonus action dual wielder attack to become part of your action. So now you get to make that extra attack as part of the same action, allowing you a third attack in your dual wielding. You may also want to pack a few daggers, which are thrown weapons, and also have the Nick property, as well as maybe a short bow for those niche situations where you have to fight at range, which also has the Vex property.
As we're going into fighter feats, if you're going for a two-hander, you're going to want the Great Weapon Master fighting style. This is going to turn those ones and twos into something a little bit better, keeping your average damage boosted up. For general feats, you cannot go wrong with Great Weapon Master. This incredible feat, which I would grab right away at level 4, is going to give you a bonus to your strength. It's also going to let you add your proficiency modifier to the damage rolls of your heavy weapons, which is a big damage boost. And when you kill a target or crit, you get another attack as a bonus action. I love this feat. It's an absolute no-brainer. Grab it with any two-hander. You may also want to, if you're going the two-handed style, to go with the Polearm Master feat, which is going to make you really good when you're using things like glaives, lances, and pikes. Polearm Master lets you do a pommel strike with the butt of your polearm as a bonus action, as well as attack people with your reaction as they come into your reach. It's a great feat.
If you're playing the archer, your fighting style feat is, surprise, archery. The archery fighting style feat is going to give you a +2 bonus to hit with your ranged weapons like your longbow or your heavy crossbow. For general feats, sharpshooter or crossbow expert are going to be important picks up here. Sharpshooter allows you to ignore all cover and fight in melee combat with a ranged weapon. Very useful if you're going to be primarily using a bow. Crossbow expert is going to help out with not having to load your crossbow all the time, and so it's going to be really helpful for just being able to fire readily with your heavy crossbow.
It's pretty much a must-have if you want to use the heavy crossbow here, because you need it to use the heavy crossbow with extra attack.
I also think that good pickups are also Skulker and Speedy for the archer. Skulker is going to allow you to have blind sight, which is just endlessly useful. And also you don't reveal your position when you fire from being hidden. So you can be the stealthy archer using Skulker. Speedy gives you more maneuverability, extra speed, as well as being able to do things like handle difficult terrain much better.
For the shield bearer, your fighting style feat can either be protection if you want to really, really be the bulwark to keep your allies safe. Or if you want to stack up your own defenses to the stratosphere, go with the defense to boost your own AC. For general feats, there's a bunch of must-haves here, and I think all three of these are make for an amazing combination. The first one is Sentinel, which again, if your allies are getting attacked, you'll be able to attack them thanks to Sentinel. Shield Master gives you a variety of defensive benefits, but also lets you shield slam your targets, pushing them and knocking them prone. This is even better because if you're going with like the push or the topple weapon, you're going to just have so much to like knock people over, knock them back, really control the battlefield. Heavy Armor Master though is super amazing because with Heavy Armor Master, you get to reduce slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning damage that comes at you by your proficiency bonus. This is going to save you so much damage. And so if you've been following along here, if you're playing a dwarf farmer that has the Dwarven Resilience and the Tough feat, Origin feat, and Heavy Armor Master, you just are not dying. You're going to have so many hit points and be reducing so much damage. Gimli is the boss.
I'm also now picturing the farmer with a trident, but it's a pitchfork, and like their shield is like an old wagon wheel or something that they've reinforced. Yeah. Perfect. Your farmer.
And the axe is just your woodcutter axe.
Yeah.
And the hammer is just what you built the barn with.
There you go.
Yeah.
You got all the tools as a farmer. When you look at the dual wielder option here, the fighting style feat that you want to look at is 2-weapon fighting. The 2-weapon fighting allows you to add your ability score bonus to the offhand weapon that you're using. Usually this isn't the case, but with 2-weapon fighting, your ability score gets added to both of your handed weapons. For general feats, dual wielder is a no-brainer here. If you're playing a dual wielder fighter, take the dual wielder feat. Dual wielder and Nick actually stack together so that you can get a bonus action attack and you can get another attack as part of your action. This means that if you are a 5th level fighter with extra attack, you get 3 attacks plus a bonus action attack if you are using a Nick weapon and the dual wielder feat. This means that if you action surge, you're getting 6 attacks total at level 5. I would also look at, for other general feats, Charger, which means that if you run at your enemy in a straight line, you can do additional damage or knock them down. Defensive Duelist allows you to use your reaction to add your proficiency bonus to your AC against melee attacks. So that can just make you better at fending off attacks.
At level 3, your fighter's going to be able to choose your fighter subclass, and you've got the choice of one of 4 different subclasses: the Battlemaster, the Champion, the Eldritch Knight, and the Psy Warrior. First up is the Battlemaster. This is a classic choice that lets you add additional effects to your attacks via martial maneuvers, which draw on a pool of superiority dice.
The Battlemaster subclass is really useful for any of the archetypes that we've talked about, whether you are the sword and board shield bearer, the dual wielder, the great weapon master, or the archer. Some of the maneuvers that you have access to are surprisingly beneficial to ranged attacks. Things like being able to knock targets prone is available no matter what weapon you're using. So really any archetype you're playing, the Battlemaster is going to be awesome.
Yeah, the maneuvers combine spectacularly with your weapon masteries, giving you so much superiority over the battlefield. There's 20 different maneuvers, but if you're trying to figure out which ones that you might want to take right away, because you start off with 3, we really recommend Precision Attack, Riposte, and either Pushing Attack or Trip Attack. As you get into higher levels, though, you might want to look at ones like Bait and Switch, or there's some really cool maneuvers like Commanding Presence that actually let you add your superiority dice to skill checks, which you can stack with Second Wind to power through difficult skill checks.
Next up, we have the champion. The champion is the bread and butter fighter. You have far less to manage, so it is a really good entry point for people who don't want to worry about all sorts of fiddly things on their character sheet and just want to do a lot of damage with a great fighter. One of the core features of the champion fighter is that they get to score a critical hit on a 19 or 20, meaning that you're going to be dishing out a lot more crits than anybody else in the game. You also get additional fighting styles with the champion fighter, and probably one of the most iconic features is that they gain heroic inspiration each turn starting at 10th level. This means that with heroic inspiration, they get to re-roll a d20. This can help them if they miss an attack or if they need to make a saving throw. There's a lot of different uses for heroic inspiration, and getting it every turn is a game changer. Again, the champion works well with any build. None of their features really drive you towards a specific play style. No matter whether you're the archer or the shield bearer or any of them, it's going to be great.
On the other hand, if you want a really nuanced and complex subclass, the Eldritch Knight is going to give you the ability to cast cantrips and spells by gaining spell slots and drawing on the wizard's spell list. What's interesting about the Eldritch Knight is that because its spell attacks and saving throws are based on your intelligence, you might actually want to plan ahead if you take the Eldritch Knight and not go for the 8 intelligence and instead put that 13 or maybe even more points into the intelligence depending on what kind of spells you want to use. I really recommend with the Eldritch Knight looking at cantrips like Blade Ward and Mage Hand to give you that extra defense with Blade Ward and the utility of Mage Hand, and you can take amazing spells to boost your AC and defenses, or get a familiar, or teleport around, defend yourself with mirror images, throw fireballs, or infuse your weapon attacks with elemental damage. Because the Eldritch Knight is very dependent on spellcasting, you might also want to consider the Warcaster feat to boost your intelligence, make concentrating on spells like Blade Ward more reliable, and this is also going to give you the ability to use your spells as opportunity attacks.
The Eldritch Knight works really well for shield bearers because of the amount of spells that they can use to enhance their AC even further. So if you're playing a defensive sort of character, spells like Shield and Mirror Image and Blade Ward are going to come in real handy.
You should be like untouchable with your defenses there.
And then there's also the dual wielder, where we might look at something like Fey Touch that allows us to gain Hunter's Mark, which is going to increase our damage capabilities with all of the many attacks we're going to be making.
Yeah, because dual wielders get all those extra attacks, spells like Hunter's Mark, Enlarge Reduce, or spells like Conjure Minor Elementals, which add damage onto every attack you make, become really, really amazing with the Eldritch Knight.
Lastly, we have the Psi Warrior. This psychic fighter allows you to boost your damage, protect your allies, and use your telekinesis capabilities by expending psionic energy dice. Many features of the subclass are based on your intelligence bonus, so this is another case where you may want to plan ahead, and if you're thinking of going with the Psi Warrior, you may want to use a bit of a higher ability score in your intelligence. The Psi Warrior, because they can protect their allies and they generally have a lot of ways to control the battlefield, might steer them towards something like the Shield Bearer option. Although you can really play anything here, I think the Shield Bearer is iconic because you can combine that with protective capabilities or moving enemies around, perhaps moving them closer to you and away from your squishy wizard friends.
In considering all those build options, the final question comes down to is, how are we going to roleplay our fighter? With so many different subclasses, weapon options, feats, and choices, there's still a lot of different things that you might want to think about when you're actually playing your character at the table and trying to get into their personality and experience. For me, one of the first questions that I always like to ask is, fighters are great for having battle cries or quippy one-liners. What are yours?
Also, with the many weapon choices available to a fighter, why did you choose your weapon? Does it mean anything special to you? Is it just a tool that you use for combat? Or are you tied to it in some way? I think of iconic weapons like many of the swords from Lord of the Rings, like Sting, or even the Master Sword from The Legend of Zelda. Sometimes iconic weapons can mean something very special to you, even if they're not magical.
Was your fighter born for battle, or did war fall upon them unexpectedly? Think of unlikely heroes that never expected that they would be traipsing off to an adventuring career versus those who from a very, very young age were training and preparing themselves for war.
Speaking of training, how did you train? Were you self-taught through experience? Did battle fall upon you and you had to learn to defend yourself? Or were you schooled in combat? Was there a mentor who taught you the ways of the blade? There's a lot of options here for having an NPC mentor or NPC comrades that you fought alongside to learn your skills.
One thing that I like to ask any character is consider how you met your other adventuring companions. Talk to the other player characters in your party and ask them about their characters, and come up with an inventive way, maybe how your characters met each other before the campaign began.
Do you revel in the glory of battle? Are you excited when swords are drawn? Or is it a grim necessity? Is it something that you know you're skilled at and you use it to defend the people around you, but you're not a big fan of killing people? You only do it because you have to.
Also consider for your character, what are your vices? Do you have any dark secrets, regrets, fears, or flaws? Maybe your fighter can never resist a pint or a pretty looking thing. Maybe your fighter is very easily bribed by gold or moved to anger, or maybe has got themselves into a bit of unexpected debt. Having a flaw for your character adds a lot of depth to them and can often lead to some funny role-playing situations or sometimes difficult decisions and challenges.
One of my favorite fun questions to ask a fighter is, what do you think of magic? Obviously, if you're an Eldritch Knight, this answer is going to be very different than if you're a champion. Sometimes I like to play the oblivious fighter who has no idea how magic works and just figures their mage friend in their party can do basically anything with magic. That's one of my favorite tropes to lean into, but what's your opinion on magic?
Similarly, you might want to consider what your character thinks about things like stealth, sneakiness, deception, or even if they have a relationship with the gods, a higher power, or a loyalty to a nation or organization.
Do you have any scars or war stories? Have you seen battles, and what have your victories or defeats done to you? How have they changed you? What impact have they had on your capabilities in battle? Maybe the various wars and fights that you've been in have instilled with you certain fears or things that you don't love handling. I think a great example of that is the Hound from Game of Thrones was terrified of fire because of the situations that he faced where he had to deal with fire in the past.
That's a pretty interesting set of role-playing connections for that character, too.
Yeah. So it is really interesting where your scars and your war stories might make you proud and noble and excited to run into certain combats, but then there's other situations that have instilled in you a remembered fear, something that has traumatized you, and that if it comes up in the game, how does your character react to that? These are interesting questions that actually can drive interesting choices in the moment.
And finally, consider what your character's goal is. What are they fighting for? Is it gold? Is it glory? Is it revenge? Is it for friends and loved ones? Is it to save the world or slay a monster? Is it to acquire treasure, power, or a throne or a crown of their very own? No matter what it is that your fighter is fighting for, their motivation is going to inform so much of how you roleplay your character. So consider what their goals and what their motivations are for adventuring in the first place.
We hope that all of this has given you a great idea on how to build your next fighter. We are going to be taking a more in-depth look at the different subclasses available to the fighter and seeing how they stack up. But no matter what type of fighter you're playing, keep in mind the different roleplay and build options and enjoy the amazing versatility that the fighter offers. Anybody looking to swing a blade or maybe even dabble in some protection with shields or dual wielding, or even dabble in a little bit of magic or psychic abilities. The world is your oyster with the fighter, and you can do so much by being an action hero on the battlefield. Of course, there's no way that we could cover all the different ways that you can play a fighter, so tell us about your favorite fighter archetypes and builds in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible because we have incredible Patreon supporters that support the channel. If you enjoyed our class guides and our other video content, please consider signing up for our Patreon. It really helps make these videos possible. The links are right down below.
If you want to see us playing some D&D and actually some great fighters in combat, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings here on YouTube. The previous episodes are right up over here.
And we've got other class guides available for the 2024 rules right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
In the dungeon.